This episode is brought to you in part by my loyal patrons. If you've ever wanted to directly support your favorite creative, then patreon.com is the place for you. I consider my patrons to be my small army of support, especially when I'm in need of extra bravery to keep doing what I do. Patreon has a very attainable mission to help every creator become sustainable. And for that, creatives everywhere are so grateful. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. This is the place where we expose the threads of heroism that stitch together the stories we admire most. As a musician, singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and business owner, I encounter some really fascinating stories. Every episode you'll hear features a revealing conversation with someone who courageously pours themselves out into the world. We'll talk about fears befriended, the terrors battled, and the courage created along our stories of bravery, quiet heroism, and all-out gutsiness. We open the Pandora's box of the dream-crushing constraints we all face during significant moments of bravery. These moments of bare naked bravery are rarely censored in real life, so if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. The questions I ask today aren't scripted because I'm just curious. What is bravery? My hope for us all is that by listening to others search for and find their bravery, we will find our own. For that is what we need most, to know that we are not alone. The best way you can support the show is to share it with a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet. Tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle's Emily Ann Pete. Or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Bottom line, we need more bravery in the world. So let's be brave together. In today's episode of Bare Naked Bravery, we get to talk with Maggie McGeehee, who was born and raised in Denton, Texas, and has lived for the past decade in Seattle. By day, she's an urban planner, designing transportation programs that offer more options for people to choose their best way to travel. She also teaches piano lessons and preschool music with the philosophy that the purpose of making music is to create joy, and I love that. In May 2015, she was diagnosed with hepatitis C. Before Hepsie, music was her primary outlet and free time pursuit. And in the months after her diagnosis, she found that she couldn't get herself to play music. All she could think about was Hepsie and how to cope with the fear and isolation from it, how to fight for treatment and understanding. She was concerned with how the virus worked and how she could save her own life. There wasn't much room for music. In July 2015, she found to her surprise that she was writing and drawing a comic book. She started drawing the comic as a way to collect and process her research, her emotions, and her experience. The main character's name, Hepsie, spelled Hepsie. The comic book's name is Life with Hepsie, the Wonder Liver. She hopes that Hepsie will help others facing this and any other medical diagnosis to know that you are not alone and you can advocate for your own healthcare and you can and should ask for what you need. Most of all, just because you're now a patient, you still have power and identity beyond the diagnosis and beyond the healthcare system. You are still the unique, vibrant, valued person you always have been. You're just wearing a hospital gown. She's met people she would never have met otherwise if she hadn't been diagnosed with the virus, and it is they who made it possible for her to get treatment. Collectively, they supported and guided her back to ask the clinical tests she needed, request the correct prescriptions from her doctor, write appeal letters responding to her insurance company's coverage denials, and they helped her apply and ultimately receive medication through a drug company patent assistant program. The support of advocates and patients, her family, friends, and employers is why her virus is now undetectable. And Hepsie, her wonder liver, will have the chance to heal now. It's also why she now wants to devote her saved life to support hepatitis patients, break down stigmas, and eliminate barriers to treatment. Maggie, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So I think that is just such a beautiful way to cope with a diagnosis like this. When I heard that you were going through this, I had no idea what hepatitis C was. What is it?
Yeah, so it is. I had no idea either. I had heard of it vaguely, like in passing. You hear about Hep C, even Hep A, Hep B. And Hep C is a virus that attacks your liver. Hepatitis, the word itself, just means inflammation of your liver. So you could also have hepatitis just because your liver is sick for some other reason. But Hep C specifically is a virus. It's transmitted by blood, so blood-to-blood contact only. And you could have it for decades and not have any idea because there aren't any symptoms, or there could be symptoms right away. Sometimes there are not. Some people get really sick after just a short amount of time. And some people, like myself, I had it for almost 34 years with no idea. So it replicates in your liver cells and uses your own body cells to replicate, and that causes scarring. But that scarring, your liver is very, very resilient, which is why you can drink, or your liver processes everything almost that comes through your body. So any toxins, but any of all of your food, all of anything that comes in.
It's like the garbage disposal of the body, right?
It is. It's amazing. Garbage disposal, but like Oscar the Grouch, I think. I'm like happy about it. And so because of that, though, it keeps on going and going and going. It might be really damaged and you won't even know because it can keep compensating for that damage until it fails. So I've also met some patients who found out they had Hep C when they were rushed to the emergency room with liver failure. So I was really lucky because I donated blood. And it was the first time I had been able to donate blood. I'd tried in the past, and the first thing they do is they prick your finger and check how much iron you have. And I've always had low iron, so they sent me away again. So this time I made it through, and that's how I found out. I was really lucky, though, because I found out before I had extensive damage.
What was it like to get the diagnosis? Like, what happened, like, going up to it, and what was it like actually receiving and hearing those words?
Yeah, so I got a letter in the mail from the blood bank, which I think is a terrible way to find out, by the way. So I had gone home to Texas. We're both from Texas.
We are. We met actually here in Seattle.
Yeah.
I was your cello teacher and you're my cello student. So you got this letter.
Yeah, so I had gone home for my brother's wedding and I'd been gone for a week, and I came home to like the whole pile of mail that you get when you come home from a trip. And it was in there and it was just a nondescript letter, and I thought it would probably say like, thanks for donating, because it was just this thin envelope. So I almost didn't even open it. So I thought it was standard issue mail. And then it said, at the time of your diagnosis, your blood tested positive for the presence of hepatitis C antibodies. I have it memorized. And this probably means you're infected with hepatitis C. My first reaction, well, first I had that cold starts here and then goes all the way down.
Head to toe.
Head and goes all the way down. But then I also thought, well, this can't be true, both because I think of myself as like, I don't have any risk factors for bloodborne disease. And also, wouldn't I know by now? Or like, wouldn't I know that I had this? So the answer is I was at risk and I didn't know by now. So
Did you read it aloud? Was there anyone else in the room?
Oh, I was totally alone, and I was standing kind of close to my doorway because I had just come in the door. It was where I came in the door, and there was a table right there. I put all the mail there, and then I was kind of flipping through and opened it. So I was standing up at the time, and I just kept standing there. It also happened to be Memorial Day weekend, Memorial Day, and most of the people I knew really well were out of town. So I had gone to my brother's wedding. Other people had gone and done other things. And so I didn't know what to do or who to tell. Or, in fact, this is even weirder. I had two friends from college who I hadn't seen in 5 years coming to visit that day for lunch. We're just going to have lunch. And so they were on their way over in like half an hour. I had this, I could either tell them or I could say I can't have lunch and then sit there alone and worry. And I didn't tell them. I just went to lunch and But the whole time I was completely preoccupied with this.
Totally.
What does this mean? It's interesting because since then, I've talked to them and they would have been amazing had I told them at the time. But I was so stunned and so like, I didn't know anything about it yet. I hadn't had time to research it at all.
Right.
So I was still thinking, maybe this is wrong, but all I could think about was, what if this is true?
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite topics or like subtopics with this concept of bravery is the concept of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because bravery is not, in my opinion, bravery is not something that you just go about willy-nilly. Like a lot of people look at someone who has done something brave and think that that's what they did, but that is entirely not true. Like it's a highly strategic act that you go through when you do something brave. Mm-hmm. How have your boundaries with relationships or with your doctors or medical caretakers, how have those boundaries helped and assisted you in this bravery?
I would say what's interesting is I've dropped a lot of the boundaries publicly, obviously, like with doing the comic book. And with doing the comic book too, I didn't start out as a plan or something I was going to put out into the world. It was just a way mostly to organize everything I was learning and trying to figure out, trying to keep in mind.
So like that day when you had those two friends, mm-hmm. the choice to not share with them that day was a boundary. Like you drew that for yourself. Mm-hmm. What do you think went behind that choice?
Then it was also about hoping it wasn't true for my own self, I think, at that point. Because I also, after they left, I went and I was alone again. And then I had some other friends who I had just barely met, and they had posted on Facebook they were going to get together and watch some movie. And so I went to that too. So I didn't want to be alone, but I also didn't want to tell anyone what was going on. Yeah. And at that point it was very much just pretending like, well, maybe this isn't true and I'll keep living my life. And I also remember like I got to that party and they had a beer and it's like, this beer, because you're not supposed to drink anymore. Like,
yeah,
it's a self-destructive act. And then I was like, well, I don't care. I will be self-destructive because if this is happening anyway, like how could it get worse? But then I would say it probably took I told like very few people right at first. And then it took probably about a month before I started telling more people in general. And it actually felt freeing once I was letting go of that boundary a little bit, because my boundary was less about decisively saying this is part of myself that I want to keep private. And it was more about this fear of, will people reject me? So for me, letting go of that secretiveness and letting go of hiding that was more freeing than having it up.
Well, I find it really cool that you actually had a boundary against yourself and against telling other people, especially on that day that you found out. You chose to set the boundary to not be alone and be with people.
Yeah.
But to be with other people and not tell them. I think that in and of itself is a really brave choice.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. But
right.
I think that like sometimes bravery appears in places that we are not aware of. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes the bravery within someone can be identified only externally.
Yes, that's for sure. And I've actually learned that from meeting. I've met a lot of other Hepsie patients, and hearing all of their stories and what other people go through. Some I'll think, I can't believe that you have experienced XYZ. For example, like some people's families have rejected them, or they'll have trouble at work, or that sort of thing. For them to have gone through that is extremely brave. But for them, it was just their life, just their experience.
Right. How does the disease or the virus show up, like symptom wise? Like what is it like to have it?
Yeah. So if you have symptoms, they unfortunately can be almost anything, which is another reason why it's hard to catch. So most classic, like once your liver actually starts being damaged, you could have fatigue, nausea, jaundice, which is where you get this yellow coloring. But I hadn't gotten that far along, and a lot of people don't for many, many years. But I had all of these other, what they call extrahepatic manifestations, which just means outside of your liver, other things that can happen. So I had itchiness and rashes. I had this thing called Raynaud's phenomenon. So you'll lose all the blood in your fingers just for half an hour, say, and they're frozen. But that can also be a symptom of other things or nothing. You could just have that. And the only way you can really know for sure is these blood tests. And I also had elevated liver enzymes, which means that I had these measures that your liver produces certain chemicals in your body, and mine were off. And I had that test result probably, 12, 13 years ago. That came back and they said, oh, your liver makes weird amounts of this enzyme. Okay, go about your day. And they didn't tag it because I don't, quote, look like a person who would have hep C. It's most commonly spread via sharing needles for injection drug use, or that's the way it's most commonly spread now. In the past, it was via medical practices and blood transfusions, and I actually got it via a blood transfusion in the early 80s. It's just something that if a doctor looks at you, and this makes sense, I don't blame them, if they look at you and you have symptoms that seem unrelated to each other and you don't have any cause for them to think that you have this other thing, they're not going to guess. So like it's also could be flu-like symptoms. So they might think you have the flu.
Right.
They're not going to think, oh, you probably have hepatitis.
Right. I mean, I know from all the various medical experiences that I've had that you're all connected. Like
yeah.
Your heart's connected to your head and all of that. Your thigh bone's connected to your knees. And all that. But it also happens like holistically as well. I really am a big advocate for looking at the whole person. I mean, and both of us are because of how we teach music, right? Mm-hmm. But specifically in regards to health care, I think that applies as well. And I think that's a big fault in our medical system, that we're not talking to each other as much as we should, or our healthcare takers are not doing that. Yeah. What has been your experience with the healthcare system throughout all of this?
It's been really negative and eye-opening, and that's been good in the sense that, in retrospect, it's good. It's made me more aware of what people face. So primarily, I was worried about stigma. So again, like, why did I not tell people right away? I was worried they would be afraid of me. So it's very hard to transmit. I would have to cut my finger, and then you would have to cut your finger, and then we'd have to mix our blood up, that kind of thing. But still, it's a scary unknown, especially if you've never heard of it before. Like, what if my presence in the room feels scary to people? I didn't want that burden on other people. Also, before I understood how it was transmitted, I was worried that I was a danger to other people. But I'm very fortunate, like my family, my friends, my colleagues, nobody has rejected me, and I've been lucky in that way. However, every single time I've gone to a medical appointment, I have felt stigma from the many, many medical providers. So
how does that look?
They assume things. So one way, well, first they assume that you use drugs, or that you have used drugs, or that you got this because you deserved it in some way. And I have a lot of opinions on that. So it's interesting. Actually, I'm going to side note, like that, my perspective on that has changed a lot. Because at first I was like, I'm not a person I've not used drugs. Like, I didn't deserve this. I'm innocent. But now I've met many, many, many people who use drugs, or have used drugs, or did once in the past, or deal with addiction. And I've seen that everybody's just people, and we all have different experiences and different paths, and we've faced different things. And at least I'm not also battling addiction in this fight. And so, whereas before, even myself, I would have had that stigma too. That's really changed my perspective, because now I know people who use drugs, or have used drugs, or currently use drugs, and they're great people, and they just have a different life than me.
Yeah.
Or maybe the same life that I have, and we have this very one specific thing that's different. But so I felt that from doctors and from nurses, and, oh, you're a hepatitis patient, like, you did this to yourself, kind of thing. Like,
that's a really shitty thing.
Yeah.
That's really shitty.
I went in for a liver biopsy, which is where they stick a needle and it takes a sample of your liver in this case, and then they can look at it and see how scarred it was.
Like, how big is this needle?
I don't know. I didn't get to see it, but I did have my envision of how big it is. But I did get to see the sample, because I asked after I was done. I was like, "Can I see what you pulled out?" And it looked like this little thread. So the needle's pretty small. I'm imagining even. So it looked like a little red thread in a jar. When I went in for that, the nurse said, "Oh, you're really young to be getting this. Did you drink a lot? Did you drink too much?" Like, No, and that's a really inappropriate question, period. But also, like, I'm already in there scared, and it's a judgmental sort of thing. And again, like, it's kind of minor in my case in that, like, I can go about my day and, like, I'm fine and I don't face
Wait, let's go back.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody made an assumption.
Yes.
What did you tell her other than no?
I said no. I really didn't respond much at all. And then hours later, I had a friend come and visit me while I was there, and I told her that it happened, and she was like, "Well, we'll talk to the staff and tell them that happened. It's not okay." Because for me, I was like, it's fine. Like, she didn't know. Like, maybe she was just making conversation. And so, like, for me, because I didn't have that problem, like, that isn't a problem I was facing. It wasn't so bad. But thinking about, like, if I had, like, let's say I was there because I drank too much, like, to have that piled on top of you when you're already there for something scary and painful and weird, and you're clearly there waiting to find out, like, how bad off you are, and someone is like, "Oh, did you do this to yourself?"
I have goosebumps and I feel a little bit nauseous, like, right into this area. Like,
yeah.
Oh,
and especially, and so I think about that too for other people coming in. Like, I went in and then I had a friend visit me. What if I had come in and I was totally alone, or I don't have other resources, or that's what has opened up, if anything, this experience. Now, in retrospect, I can say a year later, positive experience. It has made me a stronger person, for one thing, but also a more compassionate person. To think, like, I go into these situations and I have so much privilege. Like, I have income and I have health insurance, even though we could talk about that. It didn't really help. And I have parents who are supportive, and I have colleagues who are supportive, and I can take time off work, off of my jobs, to go to health appointments. And I speak English, and I have access to fax machines and computers. Fax machines, like, you need fax machines still. And so I have every resource in the world, and it's still this difficult minefield battle for me to try to get treatment for this condition. And what other people face is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Wow. Ugh. A moment of silence, man. It really does. Yeah. I mean, how many doctor's appointments did you go to?
Oh, let's see.
Have you counted them up yet?
I'll have to count them. What's crazy is how hard it was to be allowed to see the doctor, actually.
What do you mean?
So I can go see, when I first got the letter from the blood bank, I needed to get tested again to make sure I had it for real. So that was allowed. I could go to the doctor and get that test. But then to try to see a specialist, which I think you've probably gone through this experience too, like, they say, okay, you have hepatitis C. You have to see a specialist, a hepatologist, a liver person. But first you have to get approved to go see them. So you can't just call and make an appointment. You have to have that request be submitted through some system channels, and various people review it. And then they send you, again, a letter in the mail that says, okay, you can see a hepatologist 6 times, but no more. And this expires in December. So you have this very short amount of time in which you're allowed to go get the care that you need to get. That, and then once I was approved to go see this specialist, it took a month to go see her. Then I went in to see her, and she couldn't do anything because I needed more tests. But no one before her could order any of those tests. It had to be the specialist. So that's just a month of just waiting.
Wow.
So then I see her, and she says, okay, you need a biopsy. She writes an order for the biopsy, but then you have to wait to schedule that as well. So it's just waiting for the approval to then wait some more. And like, the order for the biopsy would only last a month. But when I first called to schedule it, they didn't have any appointments available within that month. So I would have had to go back to the specialist again just to get it reordered. And that's the kind of thing that, again, I feel like I was so privileged and had all this ability to do all those things and go to appointments over and over and make calls all day long. Whereas other people who wouldn't have that kind of time off or
the energy, because oftentimes when you're diagnosed with anything, you're pooped.
Yes, I know. I couldn't sleep for so long. I would be so tired, and then it would be time for sleeping, and I would be awake all night, and then it's time to have your day, and you're tired. But yeah.
This is mainly because I'm curious, and it does have something to do with bravery, but it also is about this comparison thing. And I've undergone this with my medical situation. I have a tremor in my right hand, and that was totally life altering. Like everything in my life changed. And it was something that's really simple and really hard to actually see on the surface. Like I'm sure there are people who have doubted that I have it or don't have it,
Yeah.
And although that could be just me in my head. So when I go through my life with this problem now, going to doctor's appointments and all this stuff, I have this version in my head saying like, at least it's not X. At least you're not da 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 da. So like all of these situations that you're talking about, like I speak English, I live in America.
Yeah.
I may not be in like the most ideal situation, but I have all of these privileges. And sometimes I think my point is that sometimes when we are going through something where we don't feel very brave, we have a tendency to compare ourselves to other things and other people. And that's kind of like neither here nor there, but it affects how I see myself in the moment of that bravery.
Yes.
Bravery or not,
Yeah.
What has your experience been like with that comparison?
Yeah, that's happened a lot too, especially I've started doing more advocacy work. So one more side thing about Hepsie is there's a treatment now. In fact, there's a cure. So for up until December 2014, there was a treatment, but it was about 50% effective. It made people really sick and you had to do it for a year and it was like chemotherapy. And then you get to the end of it and then you had maybe a 50-50 chance that it had even worked. Now there's a thing that's tantamount to a cure and it's just a pill and you take it for 3 months and you're done. So again, very lucky that I found out at this time in history. But it's really expensive, and especially a year ago, most health insurance policies did not cover it. So I had this diagnosis, then I found out there's a treatment and a cure, and then I found out that you can't have it. It's not available to you. And again, finding that out, and even though I had employer-provided health insurance, the ideal situation, and like when you graduate from school, you should get a job that has health insurance. And I did all of those things, and then I had this health problem that actually mattered and it wasn't going to cover the treatment that I needed. So again, so it's another way in which this experience has been negative and positive, in that I knew that existed in the world and I knew that it existed in the United States, that people have health insurance and then they get sick and then their health insurance won't cover whatever they have or it won't help them. But I had never experienced that myself. And now that I've experienced that myself, I have a whole different understanding of what that means.
In your advocacy efforts,
oh yes,
today, what has your own interpretation of your own story?
Yes.
How is that in light of comparing yourself to other stories similar to it?
So now I was able to get treatment from a drug company patient assistance program, which also blew my mind because I always think of drug companies as being the evil conglomerate, and I kind of still feel that way because they're the ones that made it so expensive in the first place. But again, I digress. However, I got treated and cured. And all I had to do was take this pill. So I've had this experience where I didn't know that my liver was being damaged for 34 years. Had no idea. Then I found out, and then within about a year, I was able to get treated and cured, and I had very few side effects from the treatment. So whereas in the past it was a chemo-like treatment, so you'd be really sick and lose your hair and your stomach would be upset all the time. All I had was I got anemia, so I was cold. And I already had anemia and was cold, so it was just a little bit more anemia, and sometimes it was a little nauseous, but basically I was just taking this pill that was easy to do. And then I got done and they're like, you're cured, and my liver's starting to heal itself already. But in my advocacy work, I've met people who maybe tried the old treatment 3 or 4 times and it failed over and over, and they were sick over and over just to try to get well from this disease. I've met people whose livers did progress to damage and did progress to cirrhosis. So there's 3 levels of scarring, and then you hit what's called cirrhosis, and your liver is hardened, and you may need a liver transplant after that point. And I've met people who've gotten liver transplants from the same disease I had. They weren't as lucky as I was, and it's just whether it has attacked you fast enough to make you sick. I've got friends who they tried to get treatment for years, and their health insurance said, you're not sick enough for it. Finally, they got sick enough to get the treatment. Their medicine was then covered, but they were so sick they couldn't work anymore. So then they're on disability
Wow.
even though they got the medicine they needed. So in all of that, it speaks to exactly what you're saying, where you're like, I wasn't that brave. All I did was I found out I was sick and I didn't even really know it. And then I got well and now I'm fine. And when I meet people who, how do I talk to someone who's hospitalized or talk to people who've lost family members to this same exact virus? It feels like I don't have much to say in those instances. Or I got a tattoo of the liver that I've drawn in my comic book. I got a tattoo of it over my liver. And then I met someone like a week later who had a liver transplant. So she has like a scar there, and I'm like, oh my God. The contrast between like, here's my little cartoon drawing of a liver on my side and like, oh, you have a liver transplant scar.
It kind of brings it home. Before we get back to the conversation, I have just got to tell you about this awesome group of people I am honored to call my patrons. Every time a new song of mine is born, the first recording of it is tenderly revealed to this devoted group. They get to hear all my new material in its raw, fresh, vulnerable state and know that they are helping me do what I do. Because at the end of the day, they just want me to keep doing what I'm doing, and any reminder of that completely floors me every time I think about it. All of this support occurs through a website called patreon.com, which was started by this guy named Jack Conti, whose very attainable mission is to help every creator achieve sustainable income. In a world where artists are seen scrambling for pennies squeezed out of an expiring and broken economic system, the folks at Patreon have brought us back to what all creators used to do. Patronage is not new. But unlike a lot of popular crowdfunding sites out there, Patreon enables creators to receive support on a regular basis. The great thing is that my patrons set their pledges to whatever amount they feel comfortable with, which means patronage fits every budget out there. And of course, you can cancel at any time. If you're a creative type who's interested in joining Patreon yourself, I'd be happy to answer any questions I can. Just shoot me an email anytime. Bottom line, my patrons help me do everything I do, but better and more frequently. If you're interested in becoming a patron of mine, go to barenakedbravery.com/Patreon, Patreon. So what do you say when you meet someone who has had it worse off, or someone who you feel intimidated by their bravery?
What's been very amazing, I guess, is that nobody has said, oh, you've got it easy, kid, or like no one has said that. And everyone, I think, maybe they are going through the same thing we're even talking about, where they think, oh yeah, well, I had a liver transplant, but I know someone who didn't and they died from it. So, or I know people who have this sense of guilt because they've had somebody had to die for them to get their transplant, and that kind of level of anguish there, or that kind of, I'm facing that. I don't know. Wait, I just want to say, I think maybe everyone is thinking, well, I'm not brave. This other person is brave, or I've had this ongoing conversation with people where I think like, oh, well, I have this comic book and it's getting this attention, but I wouldn't have any attention if I hadn't had this disease. So I didn't earn that creative success. Or I'm not really an artist. I'm not a drawer. I'm drawing now, but I'm not like a talented, trained, drawing was not my thing. But it's getting this, people are reading it, but it's because I had this disease, which I didn't. It's not about something I accomplished. So it's just we're always constantly devaluing, I think, the things that we do, because anything that we do seems like just something you just had to do. Like, I wasn't brave. I just had to do this.
Yeah. Bravery is just such a crazy, hairy mess sometimes. And it really is forced upon you. And it never feels brave.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true.
Does.
Oh, it's kind of like, I don't know when I'll ever feel like a grown-up. So, meaning I don't know when I'll feel like, oh, I'm an adult now and I've accomplished these adult things and therefore I'm taking care of my life and myself. It always just feels like, well, I'm just continuing to be me. And the same thing with Like, of course I fought to get this medicine or whatever. Of course I tried to go to the doctor. Like, that's not brave. That's just like, I had to do that.
Like we said, it never feels like bravery when you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
It always feels like the slog or whatever you describe it as. So now looking back on it, what were some of the most brave moments that you went through?
I think probably one of the first was telling my parents. And again, I was about to just belittle that bravery already, like right away. Like, oh, but it wasn't that brave because of these following reasons. Because it turned out that, they were incredibly supportive, and they were worried and they were concerned, and they were like, we'll do whatever it takes to help or anything you need. That was the most frightening, outside of just getting the results, because you don't want to scare your parents. And I didn't have any hope to give them at the time. It was like I was waiting to be able to tell them something concrete, like, okay, I'll call my parents once I have XYZ test result and I have a prescription and I have the medicine coming, and then I can tell them and they won't have to be afraid. But then after several weeks had passed, it was clear I wasn't going to get the medicine and I wasn't going to get the test results, and I couldn't just keep not telling your family that this is going on with you. But actually saying those words out loud and over the phone and saying, hey parents, something really horrible is happening to me and there's absolutely nothing that you can do to help. And having to feel that and just have that be a truth and on both of our ends. That was really hard. That was probably that day. I can feel those feelings right now, even just talking about it.
How did you approach that conversation? Like, how did you start that off? It was like, ring, ring, hey, Mom.
Hey, yeah. It's like, oh, can you put on speakerphone? Which is, I don't know. That's usually a good thing. Can you put on speakerphone so I can tell you both something at the same time? Because you don't want to like repeat it later.
Right.
I'm going to tell you something and then also Dad. I remember saying, I need to tell you something. Well, and I also asked, because at the time I didn't know that I had had blood transfusions. So I think I might have even started with that. So, Mom, do you remember when I was born? I was a preemie, so I was 2 months early and ended up in the NICU, and that's where I had the blood transfusions done. So I said, do you remember when I was born if I got blood? And she said, oh yes, multiple blood transfusions. And for me, that was actually a sense of, that moment was relief, because not because of the whole innocence, did I deserve this thing, but more just like knowing part of the fear that the way that the diagnosis shook my world was, oh, if I can get this virus and have no idea how, then what else can happen to me? What else might I be carrying around, or what other dangers lurk out there? So that was a sense of relief. And then I said, she obviously knew something was up when I was like, did I get a bunch of blood transfusions when I was born? So I said, I need to tell you that I have hepatitis C. And then I remember kind of rattling off everything I knew at that point. Like, it's this virus, you can have it for years. There's no symptoms until you get really sick, but I don't have any symptoms yet, but I'm trying to figure out what the treatment course is. So also saying that over the phone is a weird thing, but you also can't be like, hey, can I come visit for the weekend? And I mean, that you could, but
when you live across the country, it's a little weird.
Yeah. No reason. I'm just coming, no reason.
Wow. And how did they respond immediately?
It's curious because I'm sure that after we hung up, that it was very different than when we were on the phone. They were both they were worried and sad, but also said, well, let's figure out what needs to be done. And at that time, I just knew that the treatment cost $100,000. And I was like, well, we'll find $100,000, which is an amazing thing to hear. And again, like that kind of having that kind of support and strength, even though you're in your head, you're still like, yeah, well, we still don't have $100,000, even if we'll find it somewhere, we don't. And also, I don't want you to like sell your house or whatever, live outside just because of this.
So that was the first most bravest moment.
Yes.
What was the second?
Second, I think when I decided to put my story online, and for two reasons, actually. So the first of all was just telling the world I have a virus that is highly stigmatized, and this is what my experience is like, and putting that out there. But second, I also had been married for many years, and then we had gotten divorced. This is like 2 years ago, so this is before the diagnosis and everything. But since my divorce, I had started dating a woman. So I had gone from being in a heterosexual marriage to like being in a lesbian relationship. And many, many, many people I knew didn't know that. So for me, it was like both putting this story out there about
it's a double whammy.
And I was like, oh, and I have a girlfriend. So it's funny because I think at that point I had told so many people about the virus that I knew and loved and they hadn't reacted in any kind of negative way, that I wasn't worried about that anymore, at least from people that I knew and loved. Yeah. The general public has had different reactions. Like the general public tends to be more like, oh, well, yeah, if you had Hep C, you should have behaved differently and then you wouldn't have had Hep C. And so we don't care. Anyway, but so I had been worried about that second piece about what will people think about my relationship, but everyone was fine with that too. So.
How did you present that? Was it on Facebook? Was it in emails?
It was, so I made a website, it's lifewithhepsie.com, and Hepsie is Hepsie in this case, and that's the name of my liver. I made the website and then I put it on my Facebook as well. And then it started being, there's different advocacy groups that have really helped me out with figuring out treatment and support through figuring out how to do the patient assistance program. One is in Seattle, the Hepatitis Education Project, and then another one that is based in Portland and in Chicago, the Caring Ambassadors.
So you put yourself out there and then they came and helped you? Or which order did that happen? Good
question. It actually was... First, I had found them, and one of my friends had found Hepatitis Education Project online, and she was like, contact these people. They're right down the street from you. They can help you. And then my parents actually ran into the Caring Ambassadors at a music festival, and they were doing testing. And my parents needed to get tested as well to make sure whether it's because it's possible living in a household, you can transmit it between people. Right. And they got tested at this music festival on the waterfront. And my mom said, oh, you should call the Caring Ambassadors. They were amazing. And I was like, Mom, I'm not going to call them. I'm not going to call them. And finally I called them. That was the right thing to do. And they were amazing. She was right. And so I had gone to the Hepatitis Education Project in Seattle has both case managers who help you figure out how to navigate treatment and doctor's appointments and insurance stuff, and a support group. So I met people through going to that support group, other patients. And then the Caring Ambassadors also help.
I'll make sure we put those links all in the show notes.
Awesome.
When the episode is out for everyone, because I think it's really important to find the organizations that exist that want to help you.
Yes. And to go talk to them, because my first thought also with both of those organizations was, well, these organizations exist to help people who, quote, really need help. Again, I have a job and health insurance and all this stuff. So like, I shouldn't waste their time or their resources. Instead of like, I can ask for help too. Like we can all ask for each other's support through things. And that's what they're there for. And and I was surprised to find they existed. And so I think whatever someone might be going through, there's probably an organization that exists. And for me, I really have benefited from talking to other patients. I know I have friends who have other diseases or faced other things, and they have wanted to go it alone, and I can do this myself, and they've been amazing. And but I can't do that. I've loved meeting other patients, especially seeing like my very first meeting I went to. I remember there were about 8 people, and it was all men and me, and it was just like, that's different. That's a different experience. And they were all like, everyone was older than me by a couple decades, but we all have something in common, and they were so welcoming to me, whereas like I was nervous to go, and they were like, oh hey, have some pizza. And meeting other people who have faced the kind of like the same dark night that you have, and they've sat up all night in their chair wondering the same things and being afraid for similar reasons it's not that you hope that other people are going through something terrible, but it's so comforting. I'm like, oh, you've been through this too. And look, you're sitting here today, and I'm sitting here today, and we're sharing this cheese pizza and like talking about a couple different times at our meeting. We've ended up talking about sea monkeys. It's like, and we're just talking about sea monkeys and like ordering sea monkeys as a kid. And like, you can just
the nonchalantness,
be a normal person.
Yeah, the nonchalantness of the normalcy that you find in the support network of people who are in the same boat.
Yes.
That is so comforting. It's like a womb.
This is like a womb.
The sea monkey womb. It's almost disturbing. So how did that experience, getting that kind of support, how did that prompt you to do a comic?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's what you're doing today.
First, it was those groups, and then there's a couple other people who, like, friend of a friend of a friend, who I ended up being connected with, who had been patients, who spent time to talk to me on the phone or tell me about how they navigated various things. And just feeling that kind of support from total strangers was, okay, how can I also provide something back? That has been a lot of this experience for me too, is both, I have all of this knowledge now, what do I do with it? And also, like, I've been given this incredible gift. How do I not deserve that or earn that, but, like, how do I pass that on? So when the comic first started, and it was just, well, I'm awake all night long anyway, so what can I do with this time? Like, well, I can draw these pictures and I can organize my thoughts this way. But it's also become, here is how I felt, and here is when I was at the lowest point. And I've also been sitting in that chair up all night. Are you another person who's sitting in a chair up all night? Like, here's my story. Like, I've faced that too, because there's other people. There's a blog, I Help See, that a woman wrote that, and I've since met her, and she's amazing. Her name is Karen.
That's I Help See, the letter C?
Correct. Yeah. And she started her blog with this exact idea. Is like, oh, I was once that scared person Googling in the middle of the night, trying to find out what hepatitis C is and what would I have wanted to find to get me through that night. And so that's kind of kept me going too, is because I got kind of stalled out on the comic. Like, after a while, it was like, oh, life comes around and you have to go back to work and do bills and move and pack and, like, whatever things happen in your life. But I really want to keep it going, both to finish out the story and also because then there'll be this complete, like, thing. Like, okay, here's all, because right now I'm still kind of in the early chapters where it's like, here's how horrible things are. And I want to get to the chapters that are like, and I came out the other side.
So, okay, without giving us any spoilers, set us up for the comic.
Okay, what's going on in it? Or
how does it start? Like, and what does it look like, and all of this?
So it kind of starts where we started our conversation today. So it starts with going to the bloodmobile that day and then getting that letter and finding out the diagnosis. And then there's a lot of working through trying to understand the science in my layman's terms of what is a virus and where does it live and is it alive? And
it's these beautifully, I would describe it as these, like, warm, quirky little infographics with this little tiny, the cutest liver you've ever seen. And the liver's name is Hepsie.
Yes.
Hepsie.
Yes.
I think it was just genius.
I love that. And then I think my girlfriend came up with that. She was like, oh, you should have Life with Hepsie, the Wonder Liver. It's like, obviously that's what it should be called. Yeah. And that was, drawing the liver was the very first thing I drew, I think, too. It's just, as I didn't know what a liver looked like. So I Googled liver, and the image results are terrifying. Like, don't I mean, some of them are illustration drawings, and that's like, okay, I can deal with that. But a lot of it is photos of terrifying, like, the bad things that can happen to your liver. So I wanted an image of something that I could hang on to as I was going through this process of, like, so I made do the drawing of Hepsie, and she's cute, and she's also powerful, because she can regenerate. Amazing. The only organ that can regenerate. Yeah. So that started with just Hepsie the liver. And then I have a friend who battled cancer, and she had imagery, and I can't remember if someone suggested this to her or how she came up with this, but of unicorns, as like this army of unicorns that were fighting the cancer. And I had this image of a narwhal, because I didn't know a narwhal was a real animal.
It's a pretty weird animal.
It's so weird. So there's this television show, Futurama. It's a cartoon drawn by the same people that did The Simpsons. And the premise of this cartoon is this guy got frozen and he jumped ahead to the year 3000. And so there's an episode where he has a narwhal. So that's the first time I'd ever seen one. So I'm assuming this is a made up futuristic outer space creature thing. And then I was standing in the elevator. I work at a children's hospital, and there's a painting of the narwhal on the wall of the elevator. I said to everyone in the elevator at large, oh my gosh, I can't believe they painted this creature from Futurama on the wall of the elevator. And it went silent. And my colleague was like, that's a real animal. What? I should tell you about this in school.
So how does the narwhal do this?
How does that relate to So that became my animal that I have as the picture in my head as fighting the viruses. So I was drawing lots of livers and lots of narwhals, like shooting the viruses.
I mean, and you were drawing them as like a meditation or like a visualization?
Yeah. Just like pages of, and like kind of, they made me laugh. And that was good. Needed some laughter. And then it became this bigger story. And I was going to do like a comic strip. So various just like really short little vignettes, but I was incapable of doing that, turned out. I'm very long-winded. So it became more of these longer chapters and arcs about myself and getting the diagnosis, but also Hepsie and as she's learning about what disease she has. And
I just love that you've anamorphized it. I never say that word. I wish I could. But it makes something so scary seem so manageable.
Yeah, because it's just this cute thing instead.
Yeah. That's great. Well, so what's happening in the future here?
Yes.
And for Hepsie?
Well, so right now she's being tweeted. So the Caring Ambassadors organization, as I finish chapters, they're tweeting her one page at a time on their page. And then I'm putting her, and then she goes up on my website too.
And sorry, I'm interrupting again. Does the Caring Ambassadors, what's their website?
Yes, it is My Journey, My Choices is the website that Hepsie is on.
Okay.
But they're caringambassadors.org.
Okay. And do they help just people with Hep C or?
They have a Hep C program and a lung cancer specific program. And then in general, they help people advocate for their own healthcare. So, and that's what the My Journey program is about and this is a lesson I've learned through this experience is when a doctor, the health insurance company or whoever tells you you can't have something or you need this or that, but you can't get it or it costs this much, you can always ask for something else. And that's something I wouldn't have known before. So I go to my doctor, I go to my specialist and they say, well, you can't get treatment. I would have just gone home. And the point of the Caring Ambassadors program and the Hepatitis Education Project is saying to patients, you can actually get a different doctor, or you can find other ways to pay, or you can find these patient assistance programs that will subsidize your care. And I would never have thought to look for that in the past before this happened.
Yeah. I'm really grateful for all those organizations out there that are telling us all that we have choices.
Yes.
It's so nice.
It's so nice.
Oh, it's so nice. And it's so simple to say, like, you don't have to say yes or no to this option that is presented before you. You can say maybe.
Right. And you could decide next week or like a month after that.
Exactly.
Or you can change your mind.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I've changed. I hope I can carry this forward, which is just being more advocating for myself. So in addition, it's usually easier for me to advocate for other people, but learning to ask for things for myself and demand things for myself has been really hard.
And brave. That's bravery right there. I am just so grateful that you came and joined us for this. And I can't wait to post some of these links up and share more of your story on our website. And I'm just so grateful that you came and joined us today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be part of the podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
So beyond the Bare Naked Bravery adult coloring book, which you can download for free at any time, your brave takeaway from today's show is simply asking yourself a couple questions. Chew on your answers and see what comes up over the week. And then let us know what happened, if anything happened. The questions are this. What are your qualifiers for worthiness, personally and otherwise? Second question, how often do you break those norms? Third question, what does it take to redefine worthiness? Maggie and I would love to hear all about your favorite parts of today's Bare Naked Bravery. You can find her and myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and more. And go ahead and tag us and let us know what you're up to so we can cheer you on. That's our show this week. Thank you for listening. Again, we've put the links in the show notes for today's episode, so be sure to visit us online for all of that. Go to barenakedbravery.com. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it for you, give us a review. Rate the show on your app, on your phone, or your iTunes desktop app. I've done this before for other shows, and I've listened to the show for months, even years, and haven't reviewed it yet. And then when I finally decided to make the plunge and actually do it, it took 30 seconds. And I was kicking myself because it took so short amount of time for me to thank people for all the awesomeness that they're putting out in the world. So if you've liked this episode and you've liked the show, then give us a review. It's awesome. It really helps us out because the bravery that you hear on the show deserves to be spread as far and as wide as possible, and you are a part of that. You're also a part of the coloring book, which I mentioned earlier. It features over 20 designs from visual artists of all kinds from all over the world, and you get to color it in, and we would love for you to post your finished pages on Instagram so we can see what you did with it, which is so neat. Download the whole thing for free or purchase the paperback version by visiting barenakedbravery.com/color. Not only that, but everyone involved in making this coloring book wants you to vote for your 4 favorite Brave charities to receive the proceeds from the coloring book. Again, just visit barenakedbravery.com/color for more information. If you're digging the music in today's episode, that's because it's brought to you by my friends at Music Box Licensing, a premier music agency dedicated to finding and crafting unique soundtracks. To find out more about all the artists, musicians, and other sponsors of the show, please visit barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. You can also find out how to become a sponsor on that link too. barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. I'm looking forward to being with you next week because we have some super awesome stuff in store for you. Until then, I have one message for you. It's this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.